Welcome to Season 2 of Cooper's Code. We are thrilled to be recording in a new and wonderful space. It is the basement of our house. You would not know that from the way it has been set up, but it gives us an opportunity with the better lighting to be able to record video for the entire production, which means you can check us out on YouTube for the entire run instead of just the little shorts that we've had thus far. With that, howdy and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and with today's guest, David Mann, we will be discussing addiction in the legal profession, including how to recognize it, help yourself, and help others. For anyone thinking about moving on, this is bleak. Set that aside and give us a few minutes. There's a challenge in this topic, sure. There's also redemption, the opportunity for change, and the opportunity to save lives. If you're enjoying what we do here with Cooper's Code, please help us extend our reach by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and consider sharing an episode with a friend. So why should we listen to David Mann? Because he's been there. On one hand, David's bio reads like a 0.001%er. Valedictorian not only in high school, but college. Stanford Law, a top white shoe law firm with a pivot into heavy criminal trial work as a public defender, then private defense. But on the other side was methamphetamine addiction leading to a felony conviction, bar resignation, 2 failed rehab stints, and life on the streets of San Francisco. For those who know anything about addiction, there's a belief that one must hit bottom before choosing to change, and it is simply a question of where that bottom is. David's redemption story led to a 3rd successful rehab. With his journey and unique perspective, he eventually found himself in a critical role with the other bar. What is the other bar? In certain ways, it is like Alcoholics Anonymous, purpose-built for the legal community. But that is only one aspect of its mission, and David will tell us more today. David is now the voice on the other end of the phone when the legal professional takes that small first step and gives the other bar a call. David brings them in from the cold. And I know this from personal experience. Almost 10 years ago, I recognized my alcoholism threatened my marriage, my family, my practice, and my life. I was terrified, and I called on the other bar. David was there. He helped me, and the other bar helped me on my path to recovery. Things happen for a reason, and the criminal defense bar's loss is the recovery world's gain. David's wise shepherding saves lives, saves practices, saves clients, and saves families. Please enjoy this very personal conversation with David Mann as we go deep into addiction and recovery. One more thing. The Other Bar is a nonprofit that can only save lives through our support. If you know someone in your practice, in your community, or in your mirror who might someday benefit from the Other Bar's services, please make a donation to make sure that it is there when the day comes. Follow the link in the show notes. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you. Pleasure.
I touched a little bit on your background in the introduction to the show. And before we go any further, is there anything that I didn't cover from a macro perspective that you think is important for people to know, or will other details come out as we move forward?
I think they will come out as necessary in context as we move forward. Maybe the one element that I wouldn't mind making people aware of up front is that, I'm a very normal person in terms of my origins and my background, middle class from the Midwest. And that from a macro perspective, I guess the thing that I try to get across when I speak to people and I incorporate my personal experience is that up to a point, anybody in participating in a vote as to whether how I was going to turn out would have not thought that I was going to turn out the way I turned out. And that's by way of illustrating the fact that this malady is an equal opportunity destroyer, and I did not see it coming, and nobody around me saw it coming until it was too late at least for me to stop. So, my bigger picture macro trajectory is one of starting off kind of a little guy, having a bit of an apex in my career and my life, and then nosediving to well below any place I'd ever imagined I would be, and then coming back up. So it's a redemption story as well. And what I like people to know is that on the first end, it can happen to anybody, and then how bad it can get no matter where you were, and then the fact that no matter how bad it gets, you can work your way back out of it. I mean, it's in a way I've had like multiple lives, and none of them have precluded the others. So that's all by way of trying to disabuse people with a lot of the preconceptions they have about this disease and who it happens to and what kind of person they are that when it happens and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's, we don't need to know about my, you've left out Eagle Scout, I guess.
Didn't I?
So, yeah.
Well, I think though it is important for people to know that in terms of your background, it strikes anywhere, and it strikes people who have an upward arc where you would not expect to see it coming. One of the things that it makes me think of, and I've heard you speak on this before, is how before an addiction takes one down, it can sometimes be a crutch, an assist that is there. And I think I've heard you use the phrase almost as your friend, as your tool, until it is no longer a tool or a crutch. And I know with you, it was amphetamine-related work. And can I give that to you kind of as a launching pad in terms of talking a little bit about your experience or what you've seen working with others?
Yeah, some of the things people don't realize about addiction are things that once you're told those things, and they seem so intuitively obvious that you can't believe you didn't have that figured out ahead of time. So, what is it? It's a disease. It's a chronic, progressive, and fatal brain disease. And so then if you know that, then you want to ask, well, why do people have this or get this? And the simple fact is that nobody wants this disease. Nobody decides to embrace it. They graduate from law school and decide to celebrate by becoming an alcoholic. It's a process. And then the next part of that realization is that people don't start a process or a behavior unless it's in some way attractive or feels good or productive for them. So, people eat drugs, there's a war on drugs, and we categorize them as just totally bad, but there's another word for drugs, and the word's medicine. And that's the key to understanding this, is people have anxiety, people have depression, people have pain, and those things make them feel not the way they want to feel. And what drugs are is shortcuts to feeling differently. And you bypass everything and go straight to your brain by putting a chemical into your body and your brain that instantly helps you be the way you want to be or feel the way you want to feel. And I left out in my list of things that people are. So people are self-medicating. And, but it's not always to address a negative and try to bring it to neutral or positive, especially in the legal profession. A lot of people use drugs for performance enhancement. And, we can wrap our heads around that with athletes. That's very common. Barry Bonds' home run record and athletes who get tested and get busted and have to go to rehab before they can play again. So a lot of lawyers, in my experience, start off using whatever they use for performance enhancement. And it's because you can time is always at a premium. If you're a lawyer, you bill in 6-minute increments. Your time is valuable. So the natural ways of changing the way you feel take time. You can meditate. You can do some deep breathing in order to address your anxiety. If you need more energy, you can take a 2-hour nap and a cool shower and go back and finish your brief. If you need to escape, you can go on a vacation. But in all of those circumstances, it takes, in some combination, one or all of the following: time, money, and discipline to do it. And if you're chronically short on time, money, and or discipline, if you can take a pill, a powder, or a potion that'll get you there like that, and quite frankly, more effectively than the natural ways, it becomes really attractive. And, people do not take whatever they take and overdose the first time or black out or get arrested. If they did, most people would not do it again. But one of the pernicious things about this disease is that it presents itself very benignly and almost positively. It comes along, and I hear this again and again from people I work with, is that when they found the thing that ended up being their problem, their initial reaction to the first exposure to it was an epiphany. It was an oh my God moment. Like, this is amazing. This is the answer. I've never been able to ask a woman to dance at a party. I've never been able to relax enough to not be vibrating in front of a jury. I've never been able to focus for 9 hours straight and write a brief. And this thing I have found is now enabling me to do this. I want more of it, and that's what happens. The thing about addictive drugs is that they have unfortunate characteristics that are, you don't, when you start, it seems fine, and you get the positive effects and none of the negative side effects. But what happens is these drugs change your brain, in very fundamental ways, and your brain stops doing certain things for itself that it's supposed to do, production of basic neurotransmitters. The drug takes over, artificially does those things, and over time, it stops working as well as it did. So people need more to get the same effect. Every drug has its desirable effect and its undesirable side effects. So 2 aspirin will get rid of your headache. A bottle of aspirin can kill you. Well, if you're nobody's going to take a bottle of aspirin unless they want to kill themselves. But if your drug is Valium and it's not working and you start taking more, or if it's an amphetamine and it's not working and you start taking more, you get more and more of the unwanted side effects, which are horrific. With amphetamines, it's sleep deprivation, delusional thoughts, paranoia, weight loss, malnutrition. It's not an attractive thing. So people need more and more. That causes them to take so much that then they become dependent on it, because some effect of what they're doing to their brain makes their brain not work very well without the substance. And so once that happens, you're addicted. You're doing way too much. It's not working very well for its original intended purpose. All kinds of bad things are happening. But when you try to quit, which would eventually be better, initially it's worse. And you're in withdrawals. So, that's dependence and that's addiction but key to understanding it, because it's counterintuitive. People just don't understand addiction. They think it's a choice. They think it's a moral failing. And what I try to emphasize is that, especially with the population I work with, lawyers, they're in a habit of trying to make good, productive decisions for themselves. And a lot of times, what they will self-report as their initial experience with a drug was not them just fooling themselves. It was valid. It really did help them perform. It really did serve a useful purpose for them. And the problem is, as humans, we really aren't designed to be able to have access to powerful, highly refined pills, powders, and potions that will instantly change the way we feel. Because figuratively speaking, that's like trying to slap a dial on the side of your head that goes up, down, around, and off. And, it's powerful and it invariably gets out of control. And then you have the problem, which we're all aware of. There's been a war on drugs, at least since Richard Nixon was president. The worst year of the war on drugs was last year. And at any given year, you can say that the worst year was last year. We're sitting in San Francisco right now, and there were 804 fatal overdoses last year. The year before, it was 600 something. The year before that, it was 400 something. I mean, it's insane. This is mostly due to, as people know, to fentanyl, but it's always something. We had the crack epidemic, then we had the crystal meth epidemic, then it was the heroin, now with the fentanyl. We're never going to run out of things that people are going to figure out a way to use and abuse and hurt themselves with.
In your experience in the legal profession, and I understand the performance enhancing aspect of it, does alcohol also play a role in terms of the population that you interact with?
Absolutely. And that's a little less intuitively obvious, because it seems like alcohol is about obliteration, or it's about hedonism, party, or, knock yourself out, escape. And it is those things for a lot of people. But anybody who's been in a place where they need to relax enough to socialize in a scenario where they would otherwise be uncomfortable, where it's important that they be comfortable, the cocktail party at the managing partner's house, and you're a second-year associate. A couple drinks can make your performance at that party objectively a lot better than it might have been otherwise. If you're able to go through a tough day at work and come home and have a couple cocktails, that will legitimately relieve your stress, your cortisol levels, take your mind off it for a while, and you can go back to that thing the next day with a bit of a reset, and therefore have more to bring to the table than you did if you were completely depleted the way you were when you got home the night before. But once again, the problem is that they all become counterproductive sooner or later. And performance enhancement, absolutely. And you mentioned alcohol. That's a good thing to bring up because alcohol is the most widely abused drug in the legal profession. I think the main reason for that is that it's legal and it's incorporated into our social rituals. Drinking is everywhere and there's a way to do it gracefully. But performance enhancement goes in every direction. I meet lawyers who, started on pain pills they had left over from a surgery and escalated to heroin. I've met lawyers who started on 5-hour energy drinks and switched to Adderall, which is a prescription pharmaceutical, amphetamine, but it has the benefit of being legal, and it's ubiquitous now because of the discovery and the overdiagnosis of ADHD. You could take one of those pills and stay up all night and write a brief. And someone once described to me a crystal meth, which is the granddaddy of amphetamines. They said, what can you say about a drug that makes you want to say, let's go build the Taj Mahal, which is not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of cocaine and crystal meth addicted lawyers come my way, and a lot of them started off doing it to stay up all night and write a brief, so nobody is exempt. And we may not have mentioned this yet, but the reason I have the job I have and do what I do is because the legal profession has the highest incidence of problems with addiction of any profession.
And that was definitely where I was going to go next is what do those numbers look like roughly? And from your perspective, why?
Well, that's a huge question, especially the why, but the what is pretty easy. So I've been doing CLEs on this topic for a long time, and there's numbers that I would quote, and they came from older studies with sometimes questionable protocols. But I was hoping over time that my numbers were wrong, and I was hoping they were wrong because they were too high because things had gotten better. And then this big, every firm has a wellness program now, and this topic is very hot. And the main impetus for that was a study that came out in 2016. A lot of people have heard of it by now, but it was co-sponsored by the ABA and the Betty Ford Hazelden Foundation. And the Betty Ford Hazelden Foundation is an amalgam of the longest well-established East Coast treatment program, which is Hazelden in Minnesota, and the equivalent on the West Coast, which is Betty Ford. So they collaborated on this with the ABA, and their idea was to do a study where the procedures were unassailable. They wanted to get the results that people would not challenge. And so they worked with a guy named Patrick Krill. And if I'm not mistaken, he was both a lawyer and a psychologist. And they designed this study. And ultimately, boiled down to its basics, what it did was interview 12,050 attorneys in 19 states across all demographics and all areas of practice. It was to try to get as representative as they could get. And these people all took a very extensive questionnaire, answered a bunch of questions, and then they ran their answers through other pre-existing protocols designed to evaluate those answers and put them in categories. So the upshot is that the number they came up with, I was using 18% of attorneys, and they came up with 20.5% of attorneys have a problematic relationship and or an alcoholic relationship with alcohol. And they also looked at anxiety and depression. And clinical depression was 23% and anxiety was 17%. And I may have those reversed. But so that's the reality. And when we beat out every other profession. I think dentists were second.
Lawyers.
Yeah. Begs the question, why? Anybody becoming an addict is kind of counterintuitive because it seems like it's an act of agency to do whatever they're doing, and they should be able to just not do it. And they should have the good sense not to let themselves get where they get. But they're also dealing with putting insanely powerful things into their brain and their body. And it's just, people they overestimate their own capabilities to control it, and they underestimate how powerful it is. So that's how it happens. But then why does it happen to attorneys? What I like to say is that if you describe the disease of addiction, you'll pretty much, after coming up with 3 or 4 descriptors in your list, leave every other disease behind. It's unique. There's nothing else like it. And then you can add descriptors which make it arguably pernicious almost and powerful. So, it's a chronic, progressive, fatal brain disease. Well, right there, we probably eliminated everything other than a metastasized brain tumor, right? Then we can take it a few steps further. It presents itself as your friend and becomes your mortal enemy. I don't think a brain tumor does that. And there's another characteristic it has, which is called denial. And, people think denial is, in the legal sense, it's saying something isn't true. If you have a less than candid witness on the stand, it's fabricating or lying. But when an alcoholic is confronted by someone as being an alcoholic and they deny that they are, they're not lying. They're speaking their own truth, because denial in this context is a complex psychological phenomenon. And its main 3 things that make it happen is, 1, nobody can be objective about themselves. And you're asking them to do that when you confront them with the fact that they're an alcoholic. 2, the disease that they have has been causing a deterioration in their brain functioning. So they're not capable of being, their judgment is impaired with regard to everything, and certainly with regard to themselves. Finally, on some level, because it starts off helping them and they can remember that, now it's hurting them. There's a phase where they minimize the harm and they try to make excuses for it. But then they have to, on some level, deal with the fact that there seem to be bad things happening. I'm not getting as much out of this as I used to, and I'm still doing it. So then they have to justify that. And so there's all these rationales, first of all, you don't understand. That's the blanket one. It's not what you think. It's not what it looks like. I can stop whenever I want. It's a choice. And if you had my job or my spouse, you would do this too, and et cetera. So you combine all those things, you have a chronic, progressive, fatal brain disease that tells you don't have it. And then, because it's a brain disease, you need help to fix it. And we say in recovery, you can't fix a broken brain with a broken brain. Your brain's your main survival tool. If there's something wrong, you fix it with your brain, first and foremost, mostly with your intellectual brain, your prefrontal cortex. If you have this disease, your prefrontal cortex is impaired, but another thing has happened, and that is the relationship between your reptile brain, your limbic brain at the base of your skull, which is survival, and your prefrontal cortex has gotten skewed. So one of the things that's supposed to characterize us as humans is that this brain can overrule this brain.
The frontal cortex can overrule the limbic.
We write briefs with this. We get hungry and get food with this. We get cold and get warm with this. We reproduce with this. This is really strong and prehistoric and powerful. But, our conceit as humans is that we're special because this causes us to have things like intellectualism and morality, and those things keep us from hitting each other over the head to get each other's food, Well, once you have this disease, perversely, and I anthropomorphize the disease a lot because my experience with it tells me that it's evil and patient and pernicious. But one of the ways it is those things is that it affects your reward system. So if you get to the point where you are going to have withdrawal symptoms without it, and you're convinced that you can't function with it, this tells your primitive brain that you need it and it has survival value. So you develop an appetite for it, just like you have an appetite for food or sex. But those two are legitimate. If you don't eat, you'll die. If we don't have sex as a species, we'll fail to reproduce and become extinct. But it's not legitimate that you think that cocaine has survival value, but your brain is in a position where that's what it thinks. So this powerful reptile brain that we have this tenuous relationship with and can usually overpower with our prefrontal cortex takes off, and it just bowls over our intellect, and people are often running compelled to do something that doesn't have survival value, and in fact, it will kill them. So I mean, it's so many ways. It's just a remarkable, crazy disease. So circling back to where you were with your question, it takes a little bit of thought to understand the counterintuitive idea that ostensibly voluntary behavior, picking this up, it's vodka, I'm drinking it, and I'm an alcoholic, is a disease, or why people would do it. But if you pay attention to the things I've just been talking about, it starts to become understandable. So then the next question is, why do lawyers have it? Because that's counterintuitive also. We're well educated, we're well compensated, we occupy a decent place in society, and we are absolutely categorically not the demographic that people think of when they think of alcoholics or addicts. We have this stereotype. They're the guy sleeping on the park bench. They're the crazy person. They're and they're portrayed that way in media, but not lawyers, right? But it turns out that the legal profession has a bunch of traits that make it a unique, powerful, and perverse profession to mirror a unique, powerful, perverse disease. And the problem, the rub, is that if you were going to try to design a disease that was best suited to take out lawyers, you couldn't do better than addiction. And if you're going to try to construct a profession and a way of living your life and making your livelihood that was going to make you most susceptible to succumbing to addiction, you couldn't do better than the legal profession. And I break that down, and over the years I've been paying attention. A lot of this is, you can find it reflected in writings, but a lot of it is empirical observation from me doing what I do for 15 years and being exposed to literally hundreds and hundreds of lawyers who find themselves needing to address an advanced state of this problem. So the legal profession, what is that? First of all, people go to school until they're in their mid-20s, pursue an advanced degree to get it. They're very invested in it by the time they get it. They're in student loan debt. They identify with it. And I think probably of all the professions, I mean, there's the medical profession certainly does this, but it creates a situation where you got a lot of people who end up becoming lawyers and they don't feel like there's very much opportunity for flexibility to back out of it or change it. And once they get there, they're kind of stuck. And I hear that word used a lot, So once you're that invested, you're stuck. Well, when you're stuck, then you have to put up with things that you might not otherwise have to put up with. And the things that attorneys have to put up with are very interesting. So when you try to answer why do lawyers have this problem, the ubiquitous response is stress. Everybody says stress. And that's completely valid, and it probably should be the first answer. However, we're lawyers. If our profession is distinguished from all other professions, then we need to distinguish it, right? That's what we do. So we have to figure out what's different about us. And there are other professions that I submit are easily as stressful as being a lawyer. A heart surgeon working in the ER, being in the military and in combat. And by the way, those are all professions that follow pretty closely on our tail for being the worst. But we're the worst. So what else is going on? So the first one is our personalities. And there's been studies done of the lawyer personality, and people have constructed a personality profile for lawyers. And there's a pretty good consensus that this profile is fairly valid. And it contains a bunch of traits that don't sound too, complimentary, especially when taken all together. So whenever I reel off this list of personality traits, to lawyer audiences, I've learned to give a disclaimer because, as you know, there's people out there who so identify with being attorneys that they sleep in their business suits, spooning a California reporter, So what I say is, this might not be you, but look to your left, look to your right. So these traits are things like competitive, ego-driven, grandiose, high-achieving, more motivated by external than internal rewards, impatient, above average intelligence. People will usually admit to that one, right? And then, argumentative, opinionated, judgmental, controlling. And you put that whole profile together, and is one of all the many ironies, for instance, the fact that drugs help us before they hurt us, is these traits, legitimately, a lot of them help us as to be good attorneys. It's not bad to be competitive if you want to be a good attorney. It's not bad to be a little bit ego-driven. It's certainly not bad to be high-achieving or intelligent. You can debate about controlling, opinionated, and judgmental, but as harsh as those sound, we write briefs and we go to court to make our argument. We want to get a favorable judgment that comes in the form of an opinion. It's the trifecta of how we think and operate and what we do. And, controlling, somebody might wonder why that is valid in this discussion when the primary end symptom of addiction is loss of control. But if you're the type of person, you have the type of personality that succumbs to the temptation to put a chemical in your brain to instantly change the way you feel, that's a very controlling personality trait. So if you take this list of personality traits and juxtapose it with the list of personality traits you will see to describe the average addict and alcoholic personality in the Addiction 101 textbook, they're almost indistinguishable lists. So the point of all that is that, to me, that tells me that we are predisposed by personality to be susceptible to this disease. So that's where we start. And then the realities of the profession come along and make it worse. In my mind and my experience, three main ways. And the first one is our money and compensation structure. So, if you're a successful attorney and you're a third-year associate at a big firm, you're getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. And most people who make that kind of money, they do their job and they cash their paycheck. You do your job and you bill in 6-minute increments, tenths of an hour. And depending on your billing rate, let's say I use 500 an hour, which is, I think, low now, but it's easy to do the math. So, tenths of an hour, 6 minutes, each 6 minutes is worth $50. So you come to work and you have to justify these bills to your clients and to your managing partners. So you've gone to school till you're 26 years old to get an advanced degree so you can show up at work in the morning and sit down at your desk and be beholden to 6 minutes, $50. 6 minutes, $50. 6 minutes, $50. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, that's irritating me already. Is it bugging anybody else? So it's a crazy way to live your life. It makes you a little crazy. I mean, when I was doing that, it was 15 minutes a long time ago, and it was much more humane. But I literally would take a file. I'd think about a case in the bathroom so I could bill the time when I got out. It was that type of mentality. But what it does is make lawyers chronically short on time, and they think about their time in 6-minute, $50 increments, which is not normal. So, wellness, everybody's talking about wellness now. Well, wellness would dictate that I go out for a walk at my lunch break and sit on a park bench and eat a sandwich and watch the river flow and look at the birds and get underneath the sky and breathe some fresh air and then go back to my office. But the profession dictates that I should stay at my desk and work and bill another hour. Wellness would dictate that I leave work early on Thursday to go home and go to my kid's soccer game. A kid would love it. My spouse would love it. I would enjoy it. But the profession dictates that I stay at my desk and bill an extra 2 or 3 hours. So when you're chronically short on time, what do you look for? A shortcut, a way to save time. And what are drugs? Chemical shortcuts. So you can't take the nap to get the energy to write the brief. You can take a stimulant. You can't pray and meditate and deep breathe to relax. You could take an opiate or drink or a tranquilizer. You can't take a vacation. It takes time and money. You can go home, turn off the lights, lay on the floor, listen to a Radiohead album and veg out, smoke a joint, and you can still make it to work the next day. So, the 6-minute billing and the money is, you think it's great. We make all this money. We bill at this high hourly rate. It's the hourly part that causes the problem. I don't know any but other advanced professions that get compensated that way. It's just not how it works. So there's that. The next thing that comes along is the adversarial system, and we know what that is. For the uninitiated non-lawyers out there, the adversarial system involves equally qualified professionals, attorneys, going up against each other in a public forum and doing battle. And somebody wins and somebody loses. And sometimes the losers don't get paid. That's what we do. In most professions where people get advanced degrees and state-granted licenses to practice whatever they're doing, they cooperate in a collegial fashion towards a common goal. A bunch of architects and engineers working on a building, you're not going to find one little crew of them over here rubbing their hands together gleefully saying, well, we put in that foundation. That's our specialty. But wait till those guys trying to build the elevator on top of that foundation. See what we did. It's going to collapse. We win, But, there's winners and losers in our profession, and it's kind of crazy. So, in support of my contention that some of these things that we do are unique, what other profession does that? It has an adversarial relationship with its colleagues where they fight. They're trying to do something. I'm trying to keep it from happening. And by the way, that if we lose, our clients aren't happy and we might not get paid. The one I think of that comes to mind is professional sports, right? So you have a Super Bowl and you have the $5 million verdict, and you got the football player and you have the lawyer. And in each case, they're moving towards this contest and they prepare. The football player has his natural abilities, his physical gifts, his training, his quality of his team, his strategy, the quality of the opponent. The lawyer has his intellectual gifts, his legal education, his experience, the quality of his team, the quality of his strategy, the opponent. But in each case, they can do everything under nature to prepare, and they're going to hit a wall. And there's nothing left to do except get up tomorrow and go to the kickoff, get up tomorrow and start picking the jury. If on the other side of that wall is a Super Bowl victory or a $5 million verdict, and if on this side of the wall is defeat, people are going to be heavily motivated to find a way over, around, or through that wall. And it exists with performance-enhancing drugs. And we know the football players do it, the athletes do it, Barry Bonds did it, but lawyers do it too. The big difference, though, is that the football players get tested and they get caught. And God bless the lawyers, we know how to protect our constitutional rights. You're not going to invade our privacy and test us. We don't get tested. So what happens? We don't get caught by a test, because that test will catch you way before it's become obvious to anybody else. But what only catches you as an attorney is when it's become so obvious that people can't ignore it anymore. And we're so constructed that the last place we let it show is at work. And we will justify what we're doing by saying, don't talk to me. I just did a big trial and won a huge verdict. You're going to complain about my drinking? Leave me alone, right? Well, if it's a progressive disease, if you don't address it when you're 26 years old, like the football players do, instead you address it when you're 42 years old, which is about the age when most lawyers have their shit hit the fan. It's been progressing, so it's more severe. And anything that's more severe is going to be more difficult to treat. So, problem. The last thing is a thing that the term is cognitive dissonance. And literally, it probably means noise in your brain. But it's a ubiquitous human phenomenon, and it has to do with feeling uncomfortable because of conflicting values that you hold, or a value that you hold that is up against something else that a held value that doesn't comport with a behavior you're engaged in. And that's cognitive dissonance. But if you think about it, what could be more uncomfortable than noise in your brain, especially if it's noise that doesn't have to do with a jackhammer and it's just annoying physically, but it's a noise that impinges on your psychological well-being and morality and how you feel about yourself. So people don't want to feel bad. People want to feel good. That's legit. People of substance want to feel good because they're good people who do good things for good reasons. But if you're an attorney, the opportunities to have that whole structure challenged are immensely greater than in most other professions, and it's because of advocacy. So it's usually our job to advocate on behalf of our client. And our client has an objective. So the client is A, the objective is B, and we are supposed to facilitate the attainment of that objective, follow the law and the code of ethics, and divorce ourselves from any responsibility for what the objective is. As long as it's legal, that's what we do. We're a functionary, a cog in the machine. A lot of times people are trying to do things. So A, his objective B may only affect him, but it may also affect the environment or the economy or other people in ways that aren't good, in ways that me, the lawyer, don't really find attractive or agree with. And that's not supposed to matter to me. I just do my job. I'm not doing it. The client's doing it. So, this is an example I have from a friend of mine, real life. My friend Kenny, went to law school with him, really good lawyer, big firm. He goes to work one day and the partners bring him in to introduce him to this new big client who's a developer. And this guy owns a bunch of property and land that snakes in and around and through these migratory bird flyaways and wetlands that happen to be up in a neighborhood where Kenny lived. And he wants to pave these wetlands and build McMansions. So it's legal, if you can make it legal. Maybe it's not right now, but part of that legal part is that we can have some agency in changing what's legal, right? So Kenny, this guy wants to build McMansions, pave the wetlands, get it done. So my friend goes to city council meetings for a year. He lobbies, he succeeds in bringing people over to his side. He gets some zoning variances, cleans up the legal obstacles. And then, he does 9 iterations of an environmental impact statement till he gets one that says that a certain salamander won't be too adversely affected. That's the one we're going to use. And then he starts proposing public-private partnerships. And okay, my client will put in some infrastructure, some sewers and some roads. We'll throw in some low-income housing. And he ends up making this package acceptable enough where it gets the green light. Okay, we've got every permit. We've got everybody's, blessings. We made some commitments. This is what it's going to take for us to get it done, but it's worth it. We've done our cost-benefit analysis. Let's go. He goes in, bring in the partners, bring in the client. Big announcement. Congratulations, you got the green light. You can go pave the wetlands and build McMansions. Yeah, everybody's happy, right? Success. This is a legal success. My friend, they stick a cigar in my buddy's mouth and they give him a bonus check. And he's a great lawyer. Then he goes home, and it turns out that he's a member of the Audubon Society and the Sierra Club, and he likes to go bird watching specifically. And in fact, he used to do bird watching in this very wetland that's about to get paved. And, this is a little bit of an embellishment. He goes up to his house and he checks his mailbox. He's got his renewal form for the Sierra Club. He trips over his bird watching wading boots as he goes through his mudroom to get to his living room. And then he sits down and reflects on his great lawyering, got this cigar, got this bonus check, got it done. What did I do? They're going to pave the wetlands and build McMansions. Oh my God, that's going to hurt the birds. I love the birds. I feel bad about the birds. I feel bad that I played a part in this. I don't want to feel bad. How can I feel better? Boom. There's a bottle of scotch over there. I know what that does for me. I'll pour myself a stiff double scotch, suck that down. This is working. I'm not feeling so bad. I'll have another one. He has that second one, and it's like bird schmerds. I'm going to fire up this cigar and figure out what kind of new car I want to buy with my bonus check. So it turns out that the code of ethics and the law are not morality, and they are not even aspirational. They're not ceilings that we aspire to. They're floors, and they represent that under which we can't go without getting in trouble. So you can follow the code of ethics and the law and still not get much placation to your conscience if what you do for a client ends up being something that is you would really rather not see happen in the world, and know that you help make it happen. So when I think about this, and I think this plays a bigger role in the need for lawyers to drink than is widely acknowledged. People don't really want to think about it. And it's because advocacy is so much at the heart of the legal profession that if you start criticizing that, where is it going to end? And this goes to a bigger topic, which is there's so many things about the legal profession's culture that are so unassailable that it is a huge challenge, because a lot of them are, in my opinion, inherently toxic. The 2,200 hours a year to make partner, that you can't take a vacation or everybody will look sideways at you. You got to show up on Saturdays and put in some time, on and on. But anyway, if Kenny wants to absolve himself from feeling bad about what he's done here, the obvious way he could do that is by saying, well, I'm the advocate, I'm the lawyer, I'm a fungible commodity. I just played this cog-like role in this process, and I didn't do it. They did it. They got the bulldozers. He has the money and the property, the McMansions. That's not my business. I just did this little legal part of it, which is my job. And by the way, it's interesting that people will justify doing something by saying it's their job, because if you think about it, it's like it should be less objectionable because you got paid to do it. In some circles, that's called a bribe, But no, it's my job. They give me a lot of money to do this. That absolves me. It's weird. But in this case, he's a fungible commodity. But there's a little twist here. My friend Kenny was second in his class at one of the best law schools in the country. Therefore, presumably, he's really smart and he's really good at being a lawyer. Therefore, it's possible that if he did not do this, it wouldn't have got done. Maybe the next best guy that could have come along to be this advocate wouldn't have been able to pull it off. Now he has to deal with the fact that not only did he do it, but if he didn't do it, maybe it wouldn't have happened because nobody else could have done it. So he's using his God-given gifts, his intelligence and his legal skills to accomplish this thing that he has a fundamental disagreement with. So that's it. You got the personality, which makes you predisposed. You got the compensation, which makes you short on time and susceptible to shortcuts. You got the adversarial system, which makes you need to enhance your performance. And then you have cognitive dissonance, which makes you need to get some relief from the way you're made to feel because of the stuff you're doing to get your paycheck.
Hence the addiction in our profession. There was a learning that I got out of there that I had not recognized, which is the age 42 being the most common age at which people in our profession get tripped up, because that's right about spot on for me in terms of when I...
41 for me.
Yeah. Where I want to go next is, we talked a little bit before we started, and am I correct in, as we talk here, while you have a role as a consultant with the other bar, in terms of your views on the show today, are those your personal views?
Yeah, I should make that clear. I'm not even an employee of the other bar. We don't have employees. I'm a independent consultant, but I do have a role, and I am primarily most of my time is spent with the other bar. But it is absolutely the case that my views are my views, and they diverge. I wouldn't even say they diverge from the other bar's views, because the other bar doesn't have views as a collective entity. Everybody in the other bar, from the lowliest new member to the president of the board, is free to have their own views about this whole topic. And it's a very loaded topic. There's a lot of doctrine in the legacy of recovery that came up through AA. The push and pull between people who want to look at it from a behavioral perspective and people who want to look at it from a medical perspective. There's a lot of contradictory beliefs that people hold onto, and the nature of it is so fraught that what happens is people who get brought into this, to the inside of it, like you and I are, get brought in through pain and loss and suffering and demoralization and desperation. And then to overcome all that stuff requires a really difficult, long, sustained effort. And it's not an exaggeration to say that once you've been through that, you have been through a life-saving and life-changing experience. And as you know, part of what makes it work is a bit of a transformation as a human being. I mean, that's kind of what it takes, because to oversimplify, when you get to the point that you're at when it's bad, you're a human being who can't deal with life on life's terms. You can't process reality without some artificial help, but you're going to have to figure out how to be able to do that. And so it requires figuring out a different way to be and to think in the world so that the world isn't so unacceptable to you that you need chemicals to deal with it. So it's a huge process. As a result, the people who go through this process tend to, unfortunately, really cling to the idea that the way they did it is the only way to do it, and also because the downside is so steep, failure at this or relapse, reverting to the old behavior, is bankruptcy or death or jail. It's bad. So given that, people who see other methodologies being embraced or endorsed or used feel threatened by it, because A, they don't think it's going to work for whoever that is that's trying to use it, but B, they're a little bit worried that that's going to encroach on the way they did it, and somehow, or they've been told that this stuff won't work, but they know that the alcoholic addict brain is always kind of partly never over trying to look for a way to go back to what it did. That's why we go to meetings for the rest of our lives, because we forget we have this problem, and we just keep romanticizing the part where it worked and minimizing when it didn't work. So, and it's well known that the dream of every addict or alcoholic is to be able to return to normal drinking or using. We also know that the doctrine says you can't do that. At total abstinence, you can't moderate anymore, which is true for most people, but it's not true for everybody. So if somebody's running around espousing the view that you can return to moderation, and you are hanging on for dear life to the idea that you can't, that's threatening to you, because it's in your heart of hearts, you kind of wish it was true. And you know that if you decide to explore and see if it's true for you, you could end up really causing some severe damage to yourself. So this is why people carve out these different niches of viewpoints in this area that are sometimes almost completely opposite of each other, and cling to them, and there's this doctrine, and this is the only way to do it. And somebody is, no, this is the only way to do it. And one of the things that what I do, because it's necessary for my job, is, it's easy to take one side or the other side. What I have to do, and I voluntarily do it because it comports with what my own beliefs, but I have seen every piece of received wisdom proven not true over the course of the time I've been doing this work. I know people who are crystal meth addicts. The doctrine says that they're not supposed to be able to drink or use marijuana because they were an addict, and an addict can't alter their consciousness in any form. And it's going to take them, they're either going to get addicted to the other substance, or using that is going to take them back to their primary addiction. I know a bunch of flesh and blood people who were crystal meth addicts who quit and are successful moderate drinkers and smoke marijuana once in a while, So that is the evidence I have. And there's other examples of things that I see people can do that they're not supposed to be able to do. But to use that proactively, when I get a lawyer who comes to me, I don't want to have to sell them a doctrine that's on this side or that side. I want to figure out something that they're going to be willing to try and that will work for them. So, the more flexible it is, the more I can meet them where they are, the more likely I'm going to be able to take them to where they need to go. So if I come at them saying, this is what you do, and by the way, lawyers don't really want to take instructions. They don't want to be told what to do. And when it comes to this, you have to admit you have the problem. Lawyers don't like to admit things. We deny the request for admissions. We deny the allegations. And we certainly don't want to admit that we have this disease, even though the AMA says it's a disease. It's got all this stigma around it, and we value our reputations so much. And also, you're going to need some counseling. I don't need counseling. They call us counselors, So you put all that together, and it's a tough customer to deal with a lawyer who has this problem. So it behooves me to be wide open to a lot of views, and the views I use working to help people in the other bar, there's members of the other bar, if they heard some of the stuff I was saying to any given individual, they'd blow their top, What are you telling this guy? And a lot of them are the older people, they came in with the strict doctrine. But now, we have medically assisted treatment, and we have way more sophisticated knowledge about brain chemistry than we used to have. And if I don't take advantage of the knowledge that we have, then I'm not going to be as effective as I could be. So we all started all that with are my views the views of the other bar? And the answer is no, they're mine. The other bar doesn't really have any of its own, agreed upon views.
I want to transition now to talk a little bit about the other bar and what it is and what services it provides, because I know some people in our profession may be peripherally aware that it exists out there for legal professionals who are facing challenges as far as addiction is concerned. And some people may even know that it uses a lot of the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous principles in terms of how it approaches things. But I think that's where their understanding may top out, and I know that there is so much more. Can you expand a little bit on what the other bar is and how it functions and how it helps people going through recovery?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I've been privileged to have this role I have with the other bar for 15 years now. But the organization has existed for 45 years. And it started in San Francisco. There was a hard-charging personal injury lawyer, 70s, made a lot of money, hung out with his friends. They drank a lot, did a lot of cocaine, and he picked up his third DUI, and the judge forced him to get sober and go to AA meetings. And that's what happened. And he got out of the probation and liked being sober and liked AA. And it was his opinion that some of his friends could benefit from doing what he did, but he couldn't convince any of them to go to an AA meeting. And if you know the history of AA, it's based on one alcoholic talking to another. Because at the time it started, people had given up on alcoholics. The psychiatrist couldn't help them. The clergy couldn't help them. The doctor, nobody could help them. And then they found out that the reason you couldn't help them was because they will invalidate you because you don't understand. You don't drink the way I drink, you don't get it. So strangely, and one alcoholic is the person best positioned to help another alcoholic. Lawyers don't want to go to AA meetings for a number of reasons. They think it's a cult. They think it's a religion. They think they have to believe in God. They think it's populated by, lower denizens of society. And those things are mostly not true, but some of them have some grains of truth in them. But the main valid reason they don't want to go is because they don't want to see a client and they're worried about their reputation. So you combine all those things and you can't get a lawyer to go to an AA meeting, but AA meetings are one of the most effective ways to get better. So that leaves the lawyer sort of out of luck. And this guy realized all that and decided, well, I'll start my own meetings. And he did. The first one was in his conference room in San Francisco. And it turns out he could persuade people to go to this meeting. Hey, stop by Tuesday night, we just get together and talk about our problems. And that developed into the other bar. So, and it turns out just as a alcoholic needs another alcoholic to talk to because nobody else understands, lawyers don't really listen to other non-lawyers. You have to be a lawyer to understand me. So an alcoholic lawyer needs an alcoholic lawyer, and these meetings do that. And the other important tidbit of background information is that we've now pretty much established, and and all the treatment professionals and all the protocols and all the ways that this has been approached for years, is that the variable that is most directly associated with positive long-term outcomes is continued attendance at a mutual peer support group. And boiled down to its essence, that's what an AA meeting is. And so if lawyers can't take advantage of that, they're at a big disadvantage, and the other bar fills that. So what we do is we had before COVID, there were about 35 meetings a week in cities all across the state. They all went away in COVID, but we quickly got on board with Zoom. And as I sit here now, there's about 23 meetings a week on Zoom. And there's morning ones, there's lunch ones, there's evening ones, and there's some that have come back in their brick and mortar meetings. So we have the meetings, and people can avail themselves of those, which is crucial. But we also do things that are sort of outside of the realm of, we also teach MCLEs on the topic. So we educate the legal community about this, which is great. And it's great that it's a required unit because it gives us a captive audience. I do, between myself and my Southern California colleague, we probably do 100 MCLEs a year and reach thousands of lawyers.
Yeah, it seems like you may have spoken about this once or twice before.
Yeah. But the other thing is our response team. And basically, we have a website, has a bunch of information up there, but we have a phone number. And it's an 800 number, 24-hour hotline, and it rings through to my cell phone. And you can call this number, and you can be looking for help for yourself or just information, or you can be calling on behalf of somebody else that you're concerned about. In either case, I'm the one who's going to answer the phone. I don't care who you are. You don't have to give me your name. So that overcomes a big obstacle that people have to making that call. And if you're calling about yourself, we can start talking. I can usually relate to you because you're a lawyer and I used to be a lawyer. You're having a problem with substances. I used to have a problem with substances. And I can validate myself with that person and maybe get them to listen to me a little bit. And if I get that opening, I'll try to suggest that they do a few things. And I'll send them our list of meetings. Say, join us on a Zoom meeting. If they're within shot of a personal one, I'll say, why don't you meet me for coffee? We'll talk. And I can get them along the path. And that starts the process. And we have, by the way, at any given time, about 1,000 members across the state. So that, that's because what we do works. But here's what else we do. If you call for help with a condition, including this one, to anybody other than us, here's what you're met with. Well, we have this service. It costs this much, but we take this insurance. Do you have the money or the insurance? If you do, proceed to next step. If you don't, well, call somebody else. You got the money and the insurance? Okay. We have a appointment available 3 weeks from now on Thursday, and here's our address. See you then. Well, the nature of this affliction is that people have to become willing to want help, and also the window of opportunity closes sometimes really fast. They're willing because they mouthed off at the firm Christmas party last night, and they're afraid that they're going to lose their job. They're willing because their wife finally had enough and threatened to divorce them. They're willing because they're hungover and they're calling you in the morning when they feel guilty and weak and vulnerable. If you don't grab them when you got them, they fade away a lot of times, because what will happen is that same willingness makes them put in a little bit of effort to try to regain some control. I'm not going to do that again. And they'll succeed. They'll go 4 days without a drink, or they'll go a month where they moderate, even though they usually couldn't. And then this convinces them that they had overreacted, and they're okay and they can handle it on their own. So, the appointment 3 weeks out at the brick and mortar location with the money and the insurance is not the best way to receive these people. The way I receive them is this. What's going on? Tell me about it. Okay. I'll talk to them long enough to figure out what I think they need, and I'll explore, whether they can get that. You probably should go to rehab, or, maybe you can just do this with meetings. But this is a real example. Here's what I can do is go outside of the mold, break rule. Wife calls, concerned about her husband. He's a lawyer. I don't even know where he is right now. Well, I think I know where he is. He's been disappearing every weekend because he would just go get drunk. I think he gets a room at the Motel 6 by the airport. He's probably there right now. Oh, really? What's his name? I will drive to the Motel 6 right then and find this person and knock on the door until I get him and see if I can make him answer the door. I will introduce myself, tell him who I am, who I work for, what we do, that our services are voluntary, confidential, and free. And would you like some help? Things aren't looking too good in here. I see broken vodka bottles and a ashtray full of cigarette butts. And, when's the last time you shaved, by the way? Can I come in and sit down and let's talk? If I'm successful, we will leave that motel room having thrown this guy's stuff in a duffel bag, and I will drive him to a detox center directly in my car. And I am familiar with the detox centers that are available. I know which one he can get into based on his circumstances, which one might best suit the particular flavor of his needs, and I'll get him in a detox. I'll visit him while he's in detox. After 3 days, if it's determined and he agrees that the next step is to go to residential rehab, by the time those 3 days are up, I will have secured a place for that person in residential rehab and figured out a way to pay for it. We have a scholarship fund where we can lend people money to pay for their rehab. I can negotiate lower rates with programs I have relationships with. Sometimes I can, if they don't have an available bed, I can jump the waiting list, by getting them to set up a couch in the living room for somebody for the first 3 days. Overcome all the obstacles. Then I pick them up from the detox and take them straight to the rehab. And this is important because if they have 2 days in between detox and rehab, they go south and you lose them. Now they're in rehab. I visit them in rehab, and while they're in there, I pick them up and take them to our meetings, introduce them to our community and our culture that helps them. They get out, and hopefully they're sober and they maintain their sobriety. So the legal profession in California is really lucky to have this resource because we can do so many things that nobody else will do for you. All the usual obstacles, our whole job is to eliminate those. And that's, I've been one person, I can't go to rehab because of my court calendar. Well, what do? You do family law in Sacramento, right? Yeah. Well, we have 3 people who do family law in Sacramento. Get your files, get your calendar. We're going to meet. And we cover that person's calendar. I'll take that one. I know that judge. This is a continuance. This is going to settle. I'll call this client, postpone this appointment. I got it. Go to rehab. If I can't go to rehab, I have a cat. Well, I have 4 cats. I'll go to your house every other day and feed your cats and empty the litter box. Now will you go to rehab? We have that much flexibility, and I'm able to bring that much, variation to what I'm able to do to suit the circumstances. So it's an amazing, and I can't take credit for it. I didn't start it. I'm just lucky to have this job. But I will tell you, in the years I've been doing this, I have been directly involved in situations that I know have saved people's lives. And it's very rewarding. So that's the other bar. And that's what we do.
First off, I think that it's amazing what the other bar is able to do, and both through your effort and through the members in terms of the volunteering that they provide for things like you're describing with the calendar. Because when I said it's like AA, but that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, I can't think of any other profession that has that level of service for people in crisis.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic. Most people would say, this is actually one of the challenges in the legal profession is, for instance, if we try to get grants, what do you guys do? We help alcoholic attorneys. Who's going to give, if you help abused children, you'll get the grant. The response to alcoholic attorneys is, well, they're alcoholics, that's on them. And by the way, they're lawyers, they should be able to pay for their own solution. And the bottom line is, by the time people call us, a lot of times they're not in good shape. They used to be a partner at a firm. They're made to leave that firm. They open up their own shop, take some clients with them. They run that into the ground. Now they have a home office with one client, and they're barely paying their bills. And then that goes away, so people can't believe that we routinely get lawyer clients who can't pay for rehab, but it's a very real thing. It happens.
We touched a little bit on controversial views in the recovery community. And I'm going to espouse my own observations. I'm aware of the AA process, and there are some older views in terms of AA. And the analogy I might sometimes use in terms of the kind of the purist AA view is almost puritanical in certain respects in terms of, it's very America. It doesn't count unless you suffer. And for a lot of people, it works really, really well. And particularly, a lot of lawyers like to suffer, so it works well for them in terms of some elements of that. For my own personal journey, I found therapy was really, because there was the drinking, and quitting the drinking that actually was the easy part. It was what drove me to drink. What were the demons that lay underneath? And that was where I needed other work. And so with that kind of as a threshold, I know there are other modalities out there that people are exploring. Psychedelic-assisted therapy has been very, very in vogue as the access to psychedelics has been reduced. I know there are studies that predate the banning of psychedelics in terms of use of LSD to do rapid-fire treatment for alcoholics and having high success with that. Do you have any views, opinions, insight into some of these new modalities beyond what we already discussed in terms of you not having a one-size-fits-all mindset?
So yeah, that's a huge question, and let me preface my answer by saying that my personal views don't really matter, but what matters is making people know that there's more than one way to do this, and that if anybody is trying to foist one doctrinal procedure on them that they find unacceptable or they don't think is going to work, that they're not doomed to failure because of their unwillingness to embrace that. Because there's a thing in AA culture where people come to AA and they leave. Well, they weren't ready. Rather than take responsibility for the fact that, well, maybe we weren't giving them what they needed. It's all on them, right? And of course, there's the purists. There's only one way to do it. To justify the purist approach, also, I will say this, that there's a lowest common denominator phenomenon that works in many aspects of society and our lives. If everybody knew how to drive sensibly, we would not need four-way stop signs. But because of the way some people drive, we need four-way stop signs. If everybody was sensible about their driving, we wouldn't need speed limits. But because of the lowest common denominator, we need speed limits. Well, if you have a bunch of people showing up with a progressive and fatal disease, some of them are going to need that purist approach. And everything about that purist approach is going to be true for them. And the upside of making them do too much, something that might not apply to them, is that they still succeed. The downside of not making them do enough is horrible. So if you can't get it perfect, so initially at least you want to err on the upside and assume that they need the tough approach with everything, But yeah, the landscape for this has changed so much over the years. In 1937, when they started AA, they didn't know about brain chemistry. They didn't know much about psychology. And so now we know these things, and it would be silly not to take advantage of them. So specifically, medically assisted treatment has come along. And, there's the people who say, well, you shouldn't fix your drug problem with drugs. Well, we have things that block your opiate receptors in your brain and your alcohol receptors and make withdrawals a lot easier and reduce craving. Why wouldn't we use those? As far as the specifics you mentioned, the psychedelic therapy, it's a little known fact that Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, was in doing a dry out in a drunk hospital, which they called him back then, when he had his big epiphany that got him sober. And it's literally described in their literature, and he tells about what happened to him. And he had, a burning bush moment. He saw God, literally, a bright light moment. And that caused him to have a spiritual awakening, which is legitimately a big part of what alcoholics and addicts need, but that's how he got his. Well, it turns out he was being treated with what was known as the belladonna treatment. And belladonna is a plant that's toxic in a big enough dose, but in smaller doses is a hallucinogen.
Interesting.
So he was on a psychedelic when he had the epiphany that caused him to be able to quit drinking and figure out how to bring other people along. But then there's the bigger picture, which is that you'd be hard put to find a culture on a continent, in a country, on this planet that doesn't have some systematized, ritualistic use of mind-altering substances built into it. And usually they're religious and they're spiritual, and there are the rites of passage for going to adulthood. And there's ayahuasca and there's ibogaine in Africa, and there's every culture, wherever they are, has found that plant that's out in the field or the jungle that will give them that psychedelic experience. And then they've all had a response to it that has made them think, this is a valid human experience. This is something that's worth going through, and there's something that you can take away from this. In fact, we think so much of it that we're going to put it in our religious rituals, which implies that it's directly related to spirituality. So I absolutely believe that there's a place for psychedelics in treatment. And there's, by the way, it's become super popular lately, mainly because using some of these substances for research has become legal again. And it became illegal because people like Timothy Leary and some of those people basically abused the privilege. They were able to use it. They were doctors. They were at Harvard. And then they started to use it recreationally and espouse this whole unfortunate cultural approach to it that got out of hand and caused a lot of problems. And the result was they made it illegal. And for years, you couldn't use these things even in a therapeutic setting with medical supervision. Now you can. And that's why we all read about it and know about it now. But way before that, a lot of people knew about it. And it's been a thing that's true for a long time. So it's not as though this is something new. So medically assisted treatment, there's a place for it. Psychedelics, absolutely. The kind of insight that people get from a psychedelic trip that's properly supervised can cause them to transform in a way that makes them kind of a different person. And they become a person who doesn't need to use alcohol and drugs to cope. And that's important. And that's kind of what the 12 steps and what more conventional approaches do in their own way. They put you through this self-examination, this character building. They teach you a way to look at things that's different, to accept things more, to judge things less. And, if you overall get to be a person who gets along better in the world and accepts more things and doesn't put yourself so much at center of the world and want to control things, you're probably going to have an easier time not drinking or using whatever your drug of choice is. So that's a huge thing that's happening. I think it's a good thing that's happening. As far as the marijuana and the California sober thing, marijuana people have always justified their marijuana use by saying it's a plant, it's benign. And, whiskey is made from a plant. It's just distilled, and cocaine is made from a plant. It's just refined. But, there's a whole different culture around marijuana. It's considered benign to the extent that it's been made legal. So the people who want to justify using it can now say, you can go buy it. It's not even illegal anymore. There's this tautological logic. If it was bad, it would be illegal. If it's not illegal, it must be good. So this California sober thing is people who have quit drinking but still smoke pot. And the definition of addiction is using something in spite of the fact that it's having a significant adverse effect on your life. And one of the pieces of received wisdom is if you've ever been addicted to anything, you can't moderate, and you also can't use anything else because it will get you in the same place. And I will tell you, my years of working with hundreds of addicts, I have empirical evidence that those two things are not always true. People, in some circumstances, can figure out how to moderate some drug that they had used that got out of control. But more to this point, people who abused one drug can stop using that drug and can successfully use other things. And it's just a bunch of people I know who became crystal meth addicts like I did, who are successfully off of crystal meth, have productive lives, and they still smoke some pot once in a while, and they are able to have a glass of wine once in a while. And who am I, or who is anybody to tell these people they can't do that? And here's the reasons people try to say they can't do that. They build up this edifice where it's morally objectionable to change your consciousness in order to protect themselves. They have to villainize any form of consciousness alteration.
And this is a little bit of what I was getting to the puritanical mindset.
Yeah. So anybody who's doing that sort of presents a threat to them, and it challenges they have found out for their own self that they can't. So seeing somebody who can is a direct affront to their recovery in a way. And it also sort of is a temptation. It's like, wow, maybe I should try that. Well, they don't want to be thinking that way, and they're smart. They shouldn't be. But so that's, one of the reasons that people object to it. The other reason is this, there's sobriety and there's emotional sobriety. And emotional sobriety takes a lot longer than, abstinence sobriety. And it comes with character building. And the thought is that if you're smoking pot, you're interfering with your ability to make progress in the realm of emotional sobriety.
Can you expand on the emotional sobriety concept for a minute?
A lot of alcoholics start off relatively normal people, although, that personality profile I mentioned a long time ago implies that they have a certain set of things that maybe not totally normal. But becoming an alcoholic or an addict is a process of tearing down and tearing apart and deterioration. And this is why we have such a bad view of addicts and alcoholics. We think they're bad people. Anybody can become one, but once you are one, you kind of look like a bad person. You have to lie to justify it. If it gets bad enough, you have to steal to pay for it. It's your obsession is to keep getting it and using it to the ignoring of everything else. So you don't do a good job as a father, as an employee, as a spouse. So when you get better, you've got a lot of repairs to do. You want to become a good person again. And that doesn't happen just by removing the alcohol. You have to do a lot of hard work to rebuild your character. And that's where the emotional sobriety comes in. You have to work to be less selfish because you become totally selfish. You have to work to be less angry and impulsive and reactive because you become that way. But then also fundamentally, you have to work to get yourself in a frame of mind where the world is something that you are sufficiently at peace with that you don't need to do substances to be at peace with. And that's the amorphous spirituality that people talk about. So spirituality doesn't involve religion. It doesn't involve God. It involves being less self-centered. It involves being more accepting. It involves being less judgmental. And it involves deciding to value being of use to other people. And it turns out if you do all that stuff, life is more rewarding and more acceptable on its own terms. And the idea of returning to what was your no longer working coping mechanism becomes inherently unattractive. Because when people are early on, they have cravings, they have obsessions. It's hard. They want to go back to it. But if you follow this process and make these steps towards getting better in a deeper sense, you will get to a place that you absolutely find what you were doing completely unattractive and you don't miss it and you don't long for it and you don't want it. And that gives you the biggest protection against it, to get to that spot where it's internalized and it's not something that you're succeeding and not doing, even though you'd really want to do it. It's something that you don't want to do anymore on a fundamental gut level. So that's what emotional sobriety is about.
As we kind of head into the final stretch here, one thing I do want to throw out there for our listeners, I would be remiss if we went through this episode without referencing Dr. Andrew Huberman's podcast on alcohol. We have it in the show notes in terms of a link to it. It was, I believe, one of the most downloaded episodes of 2023 and talks about the health impacts of alcohol. It's about a 2-hour episode. And what I will say is if I had listened to that before the age of 42, I probably would have quit drinking a lot sooner, just learning about all the ramifications that come along with drinking. But with that, I wanted to see as we kind of wrap up, is there anything that you want to cover, anything that we haven't hit on that you feel people should know as we have this discussion about recovery?
Well, that question actually brings up something that we had previously said we might want to touch on that we have left out. The big enchilada, the idea of like, what should I look out for? How do I know if somebody has this problem or I have this problem?
Thank you.
And there's a lot of people who have a lot of different criterion for it. Some of them are purists and doctrinal. If you have a DUI, you're an alcoholic. And I don't believe that. I think you can get one DUI and just have bad luck. I think if you have 2 DUIs, you're probably an alcoholic, But the things to watch out for have to do with, blackouts. If you drink and you have blackouts, if people have to tell you the next day things that you did and you have no memory of them, you should be horrified. I mean, that is frightening. When I was a criminal defense lawyer, I went to visit somebody who was in prison in a federal holding cell, and didn't know why he was there. And I had the incident report. He said, well, you're here for armed robbery. Apparently you tried to stick up a post office and they're trying to put you in prison for 15 years. This man went to prison for something he never knew he did with a blackout. So, and blackouts also imply that you've got a certain physiological response to alcohol that is categorically problematic. So blackouts are bad. Getting a DUI and, again, getting a second one, bad. Trying to control your drinking and finding that you can never do what you planned, not knowing what you're going to do when you start. I'm just going to have 2 beers. And then again and again, you find that you close the bar and you've had 14 beers. Vowing that you're going to do something a certain way and not being able to do it that way. I'm only going to drink on weekends, and then you're drinking during the week. I'm never going to drink until after 5 p.m. and you're having a drink at lunch. And then, a big one is this. If you're even asking yourself whether you have a drinking problem, you might, because most people who don't ask themselves that, And if other people are expressing concern to you about your drinking, think about what it would take for you to express that concern to somebody else. There's a bit of a barrier there. It's a personal invasion. It's none of my business. It's judgmental. I don't want to do that. So if somebody is motivated to overcome all of those barriers and obstacles and actually suggest that to you, they must have a reasonably decent basis for their suspicions. So if other people are telling you they're worried about your drinking, bad,
I'm going to interject there just because I want to share a personal experience on that front. And the personal experience, I want to encourage people to have the courage to say what is so to a colleague when they see it. And here's the reason I say that. I had an episode probably a decade before I quit drinking, where I drank too much at a firm event. And I had somebody at the office sit me down the next day, and he was an alcoholic, and he said, "Brother, you got the gene." And my response was to be pissed off. Who are you to tell me that? I mean, you're somebody who just can't manage your booze. So the interesting thing about that was, it was like water on a rock. Over time, the rock gets worn away. And I heard it, and I heard it, and I heard it. And eventually it stuck. And I wrote him a very heartfelt note after I was in recovery that while I didn't hear it then, he was part of the stack of pieces that helped me trend towards being in recovery.
Well, that's a good, important point, because as impervious as somebody might be to that first approach, it plants a seed. There is life before and after somebody in a position of authority sits you down and tells you that you have a drinking problem. And as much as you might blow it off, it's in your head now, and it's not going to go away. And so iterations of that will slowly build up and have their effect. And that takes me back to something you said when you were introducing me. You referred to 2 unsuccessful episodes of treatment and a third successful one. And I want people to know that there's no such thing as an unsuccessful episode of treatment, because the treatment field has now determined that the average severe alcoholic or addict needs 3 episodes of residential rehab before they succeed. So if I'm dealing with a family and a spouse or a law firm of somebody who put somebody in rehab and then they didn't stay sober and they want to chalk it up as a failure, I say, no, you just checked the first box. And you may have to check 2 more. Maybe you'll get lucky and only have to check 1 more, but that's not a failure. That all that stuff that happened didn't go away because they relapsed. So, that's a real valid component to all of this is it's a courageous thing to bring it up to somebody. And as you said, the kind of feedback that you're going to get, nobody is happy with the person who tells them they have this problem. And if you're doing an intervention and treatment, this is true more broadly in life, but, initially the person who's doing the most for somebody is the person who catches all the crap from them too. In the senior citizen category, how often have you seen where the family member who's close by geographically and is doing the shopping and all the medical appointments and the caretaking gets dissed all the time by the senior citizen, and the one who lives on the other coast and comes in twice a year to visit for 3 days is an angel, So it's a phenomenon, Anyway, that landscape of things, if you're experiencing any of those, it's time to look and get some advice from somebody else and some feedback, because you have to remember, if you're in that position, your own judgment about yourself is the worst opinion you're going to get. It's almost categorically invalid. So, by the way, I should mention this. There is a widely available thing called the 20 questions. And it's people quite a while ago came up with this list of 20 questions that you ask. It's multiple choice. It's yes or no answers. And the other bar brochure has that, and it's been adapted to be applicable to attorneys. But anybody can take it. And then you grade it, and 2 things are important. There's only yes or no. There's no qualifying the answers. And then the grading scale is pretty hard. What they'll say at the bottom is if you answered yes to 3 or more of these, you might want to explore your relationship to alcohol. So that's a tool that's out there for anybody.
And we'll make sure that there's a link in the show notes to that.
But finally, what I want to say first to the lawyers is that please don't hesitate to call me. And you can call me just if you have a question. If you want more explanation about something you heard me say, my phone number is up on our website, otherbar.org. My email is up there. I love to hear from people. But you can also call me if you become convinced that you need help. And know that I can't force you to do anything, but I can encourage you to do things, and I can help you do things, and that it's completely confidential. Finally, and that's in my role as a consultant for the other bar, but also in my role as a recovering addict, I make myself more generally available as part of our ethos of service and help. So anybody can call me. If you're the spouse of a lawyer, and that's why you heard this, or if you're a lawyer and you have a cousin who isn't a lawyer but needs help, that's fine with me. Call me up. I consider it a privilege to be given the opportunity to see if I can be of assistance, because when we do what we do as addicts and alcoholics in recovery, being of service to others, when the other bar does what it does as an organization being of service to other attorneys, when we do it right and when it works, we save careers, we save marriages, and not infrequently we save lives. And if you're somebody on the periphery of this problem, you can be part of saving somebody's life just by picking up the telephone. And that is a privilege and a valuable thing. So I just want to encourage everybody to just not let the stigma keep you away from doing what you know on a deeper level is what you should do, which is try to help somebody who might need it.
And that is definitely part of why I wanted to have you on, and part of why I want to acknowledge my own experience in terms of vulnerability. It's not the end of one's career, not always, as far as being a lawyer is concerned. particularly if you catch it at the right phase.
As far as I know, you're healthy, happy, and successful. We didn't go much into my personal history, but I got arrested. I got disbarred. I went to jail. I was homeless for a year and a half. I lived in cardboard boxes. I ate out of dumpsters, and I got off of drugs and survived. And now I'm happily married. I have this great job where I get to help people. I own a home. I have 4 cats. I'm healthy. Don't underestimate how high you can be and still have this take you down. Don't underestimate how low you can go, but also be aware of the fact that no matter how low you go, you can come back up.
Well, David, thank you for all that you do. Thank you for sharing. And from a personal place for me and my family, thank you for being there when I made the call.
Thank you for thanking me, but it's its own reward. This stage, I have people I don't remember come up to me and tell me I saved their lives, and it's not me, it's the other bar, but you're welcome.
And thank you for listening today. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and any suggestions or experiences you have had in recovery. Like what you heard, share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.